I don't know who would like to begin, but we'd love just to hear a little bit about your stories.
Well, I think Susie has the best story. And, Susie and I have known each other for about 10 years, but we actually started working together about 3 years ago. But I remember our journey started 10 years ago, even when she was starting to think about starting Cypress Healthcare Consultants. But Susie, I'll let you go first because you have a fun story of a background.
Yeah, so my background actually was not in healthcare, and I don't even know when I was going to undergraduate school whether there was such a program as, healthcare administration. But actually, I started out in school studying music education. So now I will say that a lot of the folks I knew in the music school were in medicine, and they were violinists and cellists, and they had been in music all of their growing up years, and they went into medicine when they got into college, and they stayed in private music. So that said, when I got out of school, I didn't end up going into music teaching. And so I kind of bounced from one job to another, bank teller, this and that. And not having a business degree or degree in finance, I didn't have very much of an upward career path in banking. And so I got into sales. And as it turned out, I connected with a large hospital system in Fort Worth, and they had just started one of the area's first HMOs. But at that early stage, back in the late 80s, really managed care as a category was so new, nobody even knew what it was. And that's really something I think it's important for people to understand when they're coming out and starting a career. A lot of times, I'd say even most of the time, timing is so critical from an opportunity standpoint. And I was really fortunate as somebody in my mid 20s to get into an organization in a very entry level. I think I was even hired as a temp, like to do projects. And so I took it because it was a big organization hiring a lot of people, and they were growing. And I found everything about healthcare fascinating. And it just kind of went from there. So I've been in the industry since my mid 20s, and I really never left it. And I just learned everything I could. I read everything I could. I had no formal training in it, no background in it. But because I got into it when it was in such early stage development, I didn't have to have formal training. And sometimes you luck out that way. And you kind of make your own luck by getting your hands on everything you can, reading everything you can, and sort of making your luck by making yourself valuable. And so then I went into sales, and I learned a lot of different things, and sort of my career kind of went the path from there. So that's how I got into healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also missed your
Fascinating.
biggest point that you went to Baylor undergrad.
Oh, I did go to Baylor undergrad.
So,
That's true.
and I say that because I'm not originally from Texas. So when we shift over, a lot of Baylor, Texas, UTD, A&M, all that. So go
Yeah,
Baylor
yeah.
Bears.
Can't believe I didn't mention Baylor.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's an amazing thing though. We're from Colorado, and so it is a new world when you are in the South, and then there are schools like, if you're from Texas, you go one way or the other way,
Yeah.
and you're a hater if you're on one side or the other.
Yeah, all
So
the rivalries.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun,
absolutely.
but it's not something we were used to when we first got
Yeah. But
here.
I always found it fascinating. I mean, obviously, Susie has about 30 plus years of experience. My experience is more in the 15 to 20 years of experience in business and operations. And then I've tackled both technology and healthcare. But the key theme that Susie and I talk about this all the time is how much the healthcare industry has really shifted, as well as opportunities to get an education in healthcare management at all. I remember when I was going to school, healthcare management wasn't even a minor, never mind a major. So I grew up in the Northeast in Massachusetts. So I went to a business school in my undergrad called Bryant. When you grow up in New England, if you want to go to business school, it's typically one of the three Bs or Ivies, right? Harvard, et cetera. I grew up inner city in the center of Massachusetts in a city called Worcester. And my love affair with healthcare started when I was 13 years old. My parents had gotten divorced, and my mom was a nurse. and said, you know what, Taryn and Tim, my brother, we need to drive you down to the city center and get you a permit so that you can get a job to help out and pay the bills. And luckily, I had an aunt that worked for a primary care doctor, and they allowed me to have a mini work experience of doing filing. So I started out filing at 13 years old, learning the back ends of a primary care office. And then from that point all the way through college, I worked at various primary care offices throughout the city that I lived in. So I always had a passion around healthcare, especially because the majority of my family didn't come from healthcare backgrounds. Like I've met doctors and those types of things. None of them had a business background. So the majority of my family were teachers, and some nursing. But when I had a chance to decide, well, what am I going to go into school for? I'm half decent at mathematics, and I'm a big old geek when it comes to kind of numbers. So I'm going to try out accounting. At least I can use that everywhere. And then, like most of us and most of you on the call, probably, if you're in your undergrad, you're like, is this the major I really want to pick? I'm not quite sure. And many of us get a degree like Susie in music, and then we don't really go forward with a career in that anyway. So these are all kind of normal feelings if you're having those on the call. I think what Susie said is opportunity. Opportunity is everywhere if you're willing to go tackle it. So, I always say opportunity is created by you, not given, right? So you just got to keep your eyes open and cast a really broad net when you're thinking about, where do I want my career to go? But after I got through my undergrad, Quincy, I went into technology, because at the time, this was when the housing crash was happening in the early 2000s. And I was lucky with many of the millennials to even potentially get a job, right? And it's very similar to what we're seeing in COVID. And so I can relate to a lot of people who are in school, kind of looking at the economy right now, being like, how am I going to be able to get an internship? How am I going to be able to get an opportunity? So luckily through my internships, so my junior and senior year, I looked at the organizations I wanted to get involved in, and I figured out who I needed to talk to. I went on sessions like this. I linked in with, like, in this example, I would link in with the Susie Whites of the world and link in with the Tarrans of the world to try to keep that connection. And I started out at a company called EMC. That has later been bought out in the largest acquisition of Dell EMC, which we have an office right over here in Richardson. So I actually, the biggest point is, even though I started in accounting, when I studied abroad, I studied in Italy, I actually got my major in human resources. Because I thought, you know what, no business is going to be great without really great people. And so and the number one labor cost, number one cost to an organization is labor, right? Like people, their salaries, their benefits, all of that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to stay in human resources, do recruiting, those types of things. So I I got into a rotational program at a large tech company, EMC. And then in 2010-ish, they asked, well, we're starting a joint venture with Cisco Systems out of the Bay Area and VMware out of the Bay Area, and we're going to take the storage of EMC and start a new co down in Dallas, Texas. And they looked around the room and said, who wants to move to Dallas, Texas? And nobody raised their hand. Not one person raised their hand. They're all like, oh, Dallas, Texas, what's going on with that, right? And so going back to Susie's point, raising your hand an opportunity, I at the time was probably 23 or 24 years old. And I said, you know what? No one else is raising their hand. I'm going to try this out. And I packed up my SUV. I fit all my stuff in the back of the SUV, and I just drove down to Dallas. And so I was here for 3 years, and I met Susie playing softball. Okay, y'all, like softball. Yeah. We played softball. And you were writing on a napkin at the Cafe Brazil at Greenville Avenue an idea that you had about starting a company in healthcare and a consulting firm. And I personally wanted to get back into healthcare, but I really liked technology. And it was a real interesting time, Quincy, at the time, because, technology and healthcare were really changing and booming. And how do you combine the two? So long story short, Susie asked me at the time if I wanted to be a co-partner with her. be very honest with all of you. I was too cool for school. I was in a global tech company, flying around the world, being the best I could be. And so I said, Susie, I'm gonna move back to Boston. I'm gonna do global mergers and acquisitions for a series of companies, get real good and smart, and then maybe I'll catch you on the flip side. And in 2018, I got my master's up in New England area in my MBA. And then I decided, after years and years of traveling the world and having great opportunities and operational roles, I decided to start my own firm in 2018 that did HR consulting and merger and acquisition consulting, specifically for healthcare and tech companies. And so that time, Susie's like, T, everyone calls me T, by the way. You're all welcome to call me T too. T, you're out of the biz, you're out of the big corporate. You want to come down and help me out with the company, and the rest is history. So, day in the life.
Wow. It's inspirational though. And I love that the paths sounded like they all kind of went like this to where you are today.
Yes.
And I meet with students daily, really, and we talk about kind of where do they see themselves, what kind of experiences should they get, and and rightfully so, there's some pressure. Students just feel stressed, trying to, they don't want to waste time. They want to get things figured out. They want to be taking classes and, having a purpose. And so we get all of that, the stress of it. And yet kind of that underlying theme of, give yourself grace, experience what you can now, try to absorb it all. But also another theme is work hard. You can't just sit back and wait for opportunities to hit you. You have to go seek them out. So I think it's so smart. And so I'm so glad you all are here today. Now, do you all, okay, I'm trying to think. I have several questions here, but one thing that came up with several students is, what exactly is healthcare consulting? I don't really even know what it is that you do, because it seems kind of pie in the sky, or it seems like, well, everybody wants to be a consultant. What does that mean? So maybe could we start out with just kind of an overview of what is healthcare consulting, maybe as it relates to either your business or maybe in general, whichever you'd like to do first. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's interesting because I looked at this list of questions and I gave a lot of thought to that, because healthcare consulting, or even consulting just as a generic term, it could mean thousands of things. And I think because when you're consulting, it could be financial, or it could be contracting, negotiations, operational, because Taryn has such an expertise in financial and operational things. So it could go any number of different ways. So for Cypress healthcare consultants, our expertise has always been in a very niche area, and that is managed care contracting. So for most of us, and for students, they may not be quite as familiar, because as they're coming up into college, they may still be on their family's health insurance plan. But most everybody at this point, from a societal perspective, has some sort of a managed care health plan, whether they have Blue Cross Insurance or Aetna or United Healthcare, just some of the bigger names. They will have a network of physicians and hospitals that make up their network, and they are HMO networks or PPO networks are the most common, and those are considered as a category managed care plans. And the hospitals, the physicians, imaging centers, all these different organizations have to have a contract in place with the health insurance company, and that contract governs the relationship. There's language around the relationship, and there are financial terms, of course. So that is really our expertise. And we'll talk a little bit about our services depending on our time today, but essentially when I started the company in 2011, my objective was to be a fractional expert for small and medium-sized healthcare facilities that either by strategic or budgetary decision did not have a full-time person handling their contracts, and they needed somebody to help them. Sometimes they were completely new buildings that were just starting, a new hospital that was being built from the ground up. And so they may need 20 or 30 contracts negotiated between all of the health plans to get in network so that when they started accepting patients, they would be in network and could accept those patients and get paid. And so that's really our expertise, is to help people negotiate those relationships, because if they're not in network, they can't accept patients and ultimately they can't get paid. And then on the flip side, we also work with health plans and they hire us to go build networks. And in that sense, that means they hire us to go out and contract with hospitals and physicians to build a network of healthcare providers, maybe to go into a new state or go into a new city. And then there's lots of tentacles off of those two basic areas that we might consult in to help with strategy and those kinds of things. But I think if I pulled it up to a 50,000 foot level, when somebody thinks about being a consultant, to me, the most important thing about it is that you are trying to bring everything you've ever learned, everything you've ever seen and experienced to your client, and then you listen to what your client's issues are, what are their problems, and you say, okay, what have I ever learned? What have I ever seen done? How can I help them solve this issue? And to me, that's sort of the basic, what is consulting? Helping your client figure out what is their problem, what do they need to do to help fix that problem, and how can I help them get from that point A to point B.
Yeah, and if it's helpful,
Great.
Quincy, we put together some slides just to make sure there's visuals involved, because I know some people are more visual than auditory, but just
Great.
as some of our service verticals, and we can get this slide deck over to you as well.
Okay.
So hopefully you can see my slide. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so from this current slide, these are the three areas that Susie was kind of talking about in where the categories of where we consult our clients. So obviously you can read through these categories at a high level, and these are our services. And then Quincy, you know that we often have either internships or postgraduate positions, and we've been partnering with UTD, bringing in students for interns as well as postgraduate. And then obviously we know we have folks going to get their master's as well for about 6 years or so, right, Susie? Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And even so, we have 3 new hires, 2 interns, and 1 postgraduate starting on Monday from UTD. So we are all about
so
the
excited.
Partnership we have with UTD.
Very
and thank you, Quincy, for that. But these are kind of the 3 service verticals in our niche of the consulting world that we kind of work on.
So students, if you have questions or if you're working, you can't necessarily unmute yourself, stick questions in the chat here, because then we can be sure that we get those answered for you.
Fantastic.
Perfect. And also, Quincy, just so you know, I mean, things that you were talking about work ethic and those types of things, we do have some slides too on things like, well, what are the job opportunities at Cypress Healthcare Consultants if we were to hire out of UTD? So we can talk that if that's where you want to take the conversation. We also can talk through like interviewing UTD students or folks that are getting their masters, et cetera, what we're looking for and the trends that we're seeing. So, you know, this is really meant to be as fluid as we need to based on the audience and what you all have on your minds that you would love to get answered.
Perfect. Well, kind of reading through some of this, you know, a couple questions come to mind for me, which would be, okay, if you're a student, let's say you're undergrad or graduate, and even just after, you know, this first, 20 minutes or so, they're saying to themselves, I want to do this, or I want to learn more about this. What are either classes that you would recommend, maybe like an overview of like, right now they are learning the business of healthcare. So basically, if they are undergrad or graduates in our healthcare programs, they are getting a really good basic business foundation. But with, so for the undergraduate, with like 5 or 6 healthcare specific classes. At the graduate level, they are taking everything through the lens of healthcare. So like 9 concentrated classes of healthcare economics, healthcare finance. So they are kind of really digging into what that looks like, and then some space for a few electives. And we do have some other students on the call who are not in a healthcare degree at all, but have an interest in getting into a healthcare field within maybe analytics or something. So I guess I'd like to start with, what type of specialty are you looking for with education? And then maybe part two of that would be, in addition to the classes, separate from those, what kind of experiences should students get while they're in the programs to prepare them for either an internship or a postgraduate opportunity? Kind of based on that slide, because that was a really nice description. But yeah, I would say education and experience. What would you recommend?
Yep. So Susie, I can go first for sure if you'd like that. And then I know the chat is on fire, which I love.
I know, I'm watching this
I
chat.
know, I can see Susie loves herself some chat. So if
Good,
y'all
this is great.
in, like, we are all about it. And you can ask us anything within reason, but we're open books. So here's the deal. So as you know, my HR background, I recruit, I've done global recruiting, I've recruited in tech and healthcare, et cetera. And I know exactly what you mean, where just because you didn't study healthcare management does not mean that you cannot get a job in healthcare.
Right.
And there's also skills, which you heard from my background as well, that you can study business or accounting. And I had some mock interviews actually this week where someone was studying accounting, and we talked about the journey to get an opportunity in healthcare. So let's start with postgraduate, or you're about to be a senior or graduate. How can I put my best foot forward? Often what we look for is, did you have an internship or do you have relative experience? So that is always going to be rated number one. Do you have experience within the field, which is why I love the UTD program, because you really encourage the internships and help students get them. So that's always going to put applicants a little bit ahead of those that may not have had an internship somewhere in the sphere of healthcare. Okay. Number two, if you're having a really hard time getting an internship, because I know even when Susie and I had the open roles, we had over 70 applicants, and it breaks our heart every time, Quincy, when we want to hire everybody, honestly, and we just can't. So the other piece to it is networking. So when you're getting experience, also look at where you can network. So all of you are doing the right thing now, joining the events that Quincy's putting on, open up for mock interviews, take advantage of all the opportunities. I had one person ask me this week if they could come in and shadow at Cypress Healthcare Consultants. That's a win for me, Quincy, because it means that they're trying to figure out a way to connect and stay connected. So that's on the postgraduate side, as well as, you talked about education. So, I mean, sometimes I worry about being so checklist approach on take this class and it will get you further ahead. I think undergrad is a way for you to explore. So I would actually advise that you take a good variety of courses to even figure out what you like, what you may not like, and kind of get a good feel for what you may even want to do after graduating. But I think even just having some level of courses in the healthcare space, especially if it relates to anything with data, technology, and all the trends, and you're reading articles out in the industry and kind of applying your studies to the trends that you're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, that's how you make yourself more attractive, because you have the knowledge base that the market wants to see. So Susie, I'll turn it back over to you. I know, I could talk all day about this stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a different question, because Taryn has such an expertise in all these things she's talking about because of her expertise in operations, HR, recruitment, all those things. But I'm going to take this question about the most difficult challenges of opening your own business and how did you handle difficult circumstance. And one of the reasons I say this, now you all are sort of, at least I think most of the folks here are in a business type degree, and I did not have that as a formal kind of training when I started this organization. So I'm just going to share a few things with you about starting Cypress, lessons learned maybe from the other side, which is I started the organization. Some things I learned that are positives that I'll pass on to you that I picked up from other people. One is that I started Cypress when the employer that I was working for was acquired. And they came to me, as is often the case in acquisitions, because the corporate office was trying to save money. And so they looked to reduce the corporate staff, and they said, hey, we love you, do great work, but we don't need you 40 hours a week. So do you want to stay for 20 hours a week? And I had heard other people say that they sometimes started consulting firms by using their last employer as a jumping off point, right? So the last employer becomes the first client in a consulting business. So that's something I found to be really helpful, and I would tuck it away in your memory bank. That was that. So that employer became my first Cypress client, and it gave me a base of income to build from. And then I knew all I had to do was find a couple of other small clients to kind of keep me whole to get going. That's one thing. The other thing I would share with you is maybe not so good about me. And that was, I did not ever at the beginning think Cypress is going to be very big. I thought, oh, all I'm trying to do is make a living, keep a roof over my head. Cypress will never be big. It will never, I probably never have employees. I literally never thought I was going to have any employees. I just thought I'll make enough to pay my bills, and that's it. And so for that reason, I did not plan for things and think ahead about things that I should have been thinking about and planning for. So I would say to you, if you have the aspiration to start a business, whether you think you'll ever get there or not, you should plan as if it's going to be big. And get good advice about what if it is big, what if you have employees. Make sure you get good advice and you have good advisors, financial, operational, legal, all these kinds of things. And then in terms of how do you handle difficult circumstances and what are the most difficult things? One of the most difficult things is sometimes you don't know where your next client is coming from. And that means you have no idea whether you're going to, one client is finished and you don't know where your next one is coming from. So you have no idea whether you're going to have money. That's difficult. And then the other thing is how you handle difficult circumstances. Sometimes you just have to handle difficult circumstances by holding on and just, it's almost like you just kind of hold your breath. And sometimes you cry. Sometimes you have a little bit of a hissy fit. There's a lot of different ways to handle difficult circumstances. Sometimes you just take a moment, take a day, but a lot of times you just wait it out. I have found one of the most magical things for me in difficult circumstances is to just wait. Just wait. It will be better tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That's really probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give for a difficult circumstance, is just to wait.
Yeah, time really does heal. And sometimes when you're an ambitious, driven person, the hardest thing is to have patience and exercise patience and try to, self-manage and be cool under pressure. Now, I will tell you, the crying or the hissy fits, as Susie teasing Susie, that all happens behind closed doors. So at the end of the day, you're human, right? You're human. Yeah. You're going to have your bad days. It is really hard to run a business. And Quincy, I'll also say this on record, it is twice as hard to be any person of diversity running a business, specifically women-owned and diversity-owned. So you're going to have to expect your challenges, right? And get the thick skin and be able to leverage your executive board, I call it, or your tribe or your team of people that can help you show up as your best self. Susie mentioned something really important too that I wanted to make sure I said. Any chance that you can get business acumen in your undergrad or your postgraduate, it's going to be key. Take a finance class. Take a finance 101 class, take an HR class, take a marketing class, take any classes that would constitute kind of an MBA, because I think, Susie, what you found and the reason why you kind of partnered up with me is the best part about our dynamic duo here is that Susie's got really great relationships and really deep expertise in her field of work. She knows so many people in Texas, I can't even keep count, which really helps when we're trying to have a pipeline of clients and resources. But she was smart enough to basically, and I really appreciate this, because oftentimes as back when I first started a business as a millennial, oftentimes I struggled to get the airspace because they looked at me and saw an age, right? An age number versus what I could bring to the table. And I'm sure a lot of you have a lot to bring to organizations, but the truth may be that people are going to say, oh, you just graduated from UTD. What experience do you have, right? So it's also practicing the leadership ability to look around a room and figure out where people's key strengths are and how they balance it with you. So even though Susie has the title of CEO and I have the title of COO, at the end of the day, we can't do it alone. And we have to leverage each other's strengths. And that's why Susie brought me in, because of my operations background, my business acumen, and what I can do with mergers and acquisitions. Because at the time, we forgot to say this, you had acquired a company in Austin. And so anyway, big on business acumen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I know we try to be really careful with time so we can get to a lot of information. But I think, again, one of the most important things that Taryn is alluding to is you've really got to understand where you're strong and what you're really good in and where you're not as strong. Everybody has strengths and things you're not as strong in, just because we all have natural strengths and weaknesses, and things we actually love to do and things we don't enjoy doing as much. So you really have to look for those people who complement you. That's true even when you're in an employment situation and you kind of build teams and work with each other in a team situation, and you buddy up with people on projects, and whether that's in a school project or whatever it is, you kind of group up and say, hey, you're really good at this. I'm not as good at this. You love to do this. I don't love to do this. Study groups do this all the time. Mm-hmm. And you do this in the workplace too. And if you are co-owners in a company, you do that too. And so it's really important. You don't have to be good at everything. You don't have to know everything, but you do need to figure out, it's like, what do they call that? Abraham Lincoln's, team of rivals, because he knew how to bring people around him that were good at things he wasn't good at. It was one of the things that made him a superb leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the yin and yang effect, right? Like sometimes the best person on your team is the person that's going to question everything you do, right? Why are you doing it that way? What about this way, right? Because that's where good innovation and ideas come from, is when you embrace the diversity of the experiences and skills within a team.
Mm-hmm. There's some more questions here, but you've touched on leadership and kind of some of the soft skills. That could be a hard skill too, I suppose, depending on how you word it. But what are some ways that students can try to, expand their leadership skills now before they get into the workplace? Are there strengths finders, sort of like, personality tests? What would you recommend that students kind of do some internal searching to see? And then are there any recommendations for how they can maybe hone in on some of those, if they're weaknesses or opportunities, to try to build up some of those areas to better themselves or to prepare themselves for a career? What kind of recommendations do you have for kind of building that leadership ability?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the other thing on my side, I own another firm called Crush Limits. So actually, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I part own Cypress with Susie here. I own a consulting firm for HR that does a lot of leadership training. In fact, this morning I was working with a group at Citibank, and it was a bunch of women who were turning back to work after being out for about 6 to 5 years. And we were talking about this. So my firm does Strengths Finders, DISC, Myers-Briggs. There's a lot of those things. And also, and I don't know, you didn't mean to do this, Quincy, but we also build the postgraduate program transitioning into the workplace. We do webinars and things for students who are looking to either take a DISC report and learn more about themselves. So, and I didn't tell Quincy to do that, but thank you for that. So I think there's tons online that you can do a free version of Strengths Finders, DISC, Myers-Briggs, those types of leadership skills. I also think, especially because of the pandemic and we're all working remote, the more opportunities that you can express yourself on a screen and communicate and practice presenting is going to be key. Because what I found is there are pros and cons to remote working. A lot of my clients ended up like overnight, everyone went on a screen from their homes. And that was a lot of people embrace it. A lot of people really miss human beings, right? Because the challenge is, it's one thing to communicate in a classroom. And a lot of you have all had to deal with this going on to remote learning, even in your undergrad and graduate programs. You know that it's a lot different when you can be in the same room as Quincy and feel her energy, and we can have a chat and you can say, okay, and you can feel your audience versus doing this on a screen. And so one of the key skills that I would say for leadership that everyone should really try to work on is conflict management. So working in teams and the communication around conflict. And I'm not talking about, oh, we're going to fight each other, right, in a negative way, but conflict happens. Conflict is just a difference of opinion. But I can't tell you, Quincy, how many times Susie and I, but especially me in the HR world, see so much conflict happening because people aren't picking up the phone. They're not, before we used to go grab a coffee. Now you've got Slack battles and text battles. And I'm sure a lot of you even deal with this in your personal lives. And so how, if I could say one thing that folks should really try to practice is how you manage conflict. That's our number one interview question. When you're in a team, how do you manage conflict, and what do you do when you're feeling tension with another person that is on a screen? How do you handle that? So hopefully that gave some good tips and tricks.
Yes. I'm trying to take notes, but then, I used to be a social worker, and so you have to like take notes while you're making, and you want to be focused on the person, but you're trying to do this, and then you're not present. And so
that is such a skill. I noticed Nina had a good question in the chat, so I didn't want to skip over it. She's asking about a requirement to hire graduates and consultants with a master's and certifications that grab your attention. So Nina, I just wanted to give you some feedback on that. And it's really particular to Cypress because of the fact that we're a smaller firm and a niche firm. So folks that come into our organization who are in a consulting role, as a general rule, and I won't say this is 100% of the time, but as a general rule, they have worked in the field of managed care, usually in some capacity or another, for 4 or 5 years when they are coming in as a consultant, because that means they have already had some experience, whether they worked for a hospital or some sort of a post-acute healthcare facility and done contract negotiation, whether it was for physicians or for a healthcare facility or hospital, or maybe they worked for Blue Cross or Aetna or some health plan. And so those are usually consulting roles. So we don't really require a master's. That's just a straight yes or no question to you on that one. But the experience is really critical, because when you come into a smaller firm, we don't have a lot of layers of management. And whereas if you went to a Blue Cross or to an Aetna, they have an enormous wealth of layers of management where you can come in with a master's and not have workplace experience. And you get all this opportunity to sort of learn on the job training, and then maybe go to a really small firm like a Cypress or other firms that are small like we are. So that may give you a little bit of an insight into that. I don't know, T, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. In larger firms, right? So, I've been asked by Deloitte or E&Y to say, hey, T, can you come in and be a consultant? So obviously, your education and or equivalent experience are going to go a long way. So, for example, I have my own consulting firm. I didn't go to Harvard, although, it's too expensive for my family. So I had to pick the school that I could get a scholarship for. I didn't go to Ivy League, even though I rub elbows now with everybody who do. So there is something to be said about having the letters behind your name if your client is requiring it, so that I always say you have to play the game to beat it. So you got to know which clients, what are they looking for, and what do you need to just get your foot in the door, okay? But for smaller to mid-sized consulting firms, it's really around your experience, because the ability to even have consultant behind your name, you've got to be a subject matter or have a lot of experience somewhere. Now, on the other side of the coin, I know there's a lot of you saying, but I really want to be a consultant and I'm in my master's program, or I aspire to be a consultant. If nobody gives me the opportunity to get the experience, how am I supposed to even compete? That happens all the time. So what I will tell you, and Susie and I were talking about this the last couple of weeks when we've been interviewing, is sometimes you are not you're going to need to swallow the pill that you're not going to be a consultant overnight. That just doesn't happen. And both Susie and I have had to pay our dues quite a bit, where even going in and I wanted to get into that company, I will do whatever. I'll wash the floors, I'll do filing, whatever. Even though I have a degree and I can bring so much more to the table, it's all about eating the humble pie a bit to be able to get your foot at least in the door. Work your tail off. Work ethic is so important, Quincy. You mentioned it, and I'm like, yep, Quincy's right there in my heartstrings. Work your tail off to be able to get there, and then build the relationship with the key stakeholders at that company and make yourself irreplaceable. And sometimes people don't quite understand, or they ask me, hey T, what makes me irreplaceable though? Like, what can I do to make myself differentiated, if you will? There's a couple of things. So one is the workload that you're willing to take on, right? If you're done your project, are you the person that's going to ask for more, right? I'll take on more workload. How can I help you? Two is, I've always said, you know, it's the necessary truth. If you can make your boss or your manager or your leader look good, they're gonna say, stay here all day long and stay here forever because you are so good. You're making me look good. You're never gonna, you know, they're never gonna want to replace you. And then I think I see Esmond on here, who we had a mock interview, but I was talking to a few folks this week in mock interviews. And the second thing is, or the third thing is, make yourself $1 million player. And what I mean by that is, when you go into an organization, you're getting paid a salary, right? And so if you think about it from a business model, you either want to make the business your salary or save the business your salary with your business acumen. And if you can make the business twice your salary, so say you make 40,000 and you can make the business 80 or save the business 80, you're going to get a promotion. Then you make the 80. Now I'm going to try to save the business 160 or make the business 160. Guess what? You get a promotion of 150. So these are things, if you can look at your own personal ROI and what you bring to the table and how you can help that leader look good, save money, or make money, unstoppable. So hopefully that's helpful.
Can I tell a quick story? So when I was talking about my career path, I didn't get into a lot of detail, but I started out when I was kind of in my mid-20s, I think 26. So when I was 30, I got my first senior management position in a hospital system. And I had been there, I think, for maybe 2 or 3 years. And I thought, I'm something, and I should be a consultant now. So a consulting firm here in North Dallas was interviewing for consultants, and it was a managed care consulting firm. And it was kind of the hot thing at the time, the cool place to work. So I went in and I thought I was pretty cool. And I interviewed with the owners, and it was not too different from my organization now, but it was a little bit bigger. So I go in, and I remember to tie right into the story Taryn just told. And I'll tell you right now, as we're sitting here, this was in, I don't know, the early 90s, dates me. That's okay. I'm okay with it. I want you to know how old I am. Early 90s, the salary was $70,000, which I thought was like $1 million to me at the time, $1 million to me. And they said to me, can you bring in, guess, $140,000 worth of client business? And I thought I might just, have an accident in the chair.
Yeah.
Because what I figured out really fast was that I didn't understand a thing about what it really meant to be a consultant, because I had a lot of ego, and I was smart. I worked really hard to get where I was, but I really did not understand what it meant to be a consultant, because it did mean experience. It did mean knowing the business, but it also meant connections and building relationships and a network of people that I could bring who would want to hire me so that I could bring business to that firm.
Mm-hmm.
I, as you might guess, did not get that job. But it was a really good experience for me to really understand, because I had always aspired to be a consultant because I thought that was kind of like the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ultimately started Cypress, I had kind of put that dream aside. I'd kind of gone on and I sort of lost sight of that I would ever do that. But as Taryn said, one of the reasons I was able ultimately to build Cypress was because I had worked for 30 years by that time. And over 30 years, you just meet a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are honest with people and you do what you say you'll do and you don't cheat people and you just show up and you just, are nice. Most of the time, I'm not always nice, I'll admit that. But you just try to do right by people, eventually, people will call you and they'll say, oh, you know what you're doing and will you help me? And you can build business. And so I would say to you, most everybody wants to be a consultant, if you kind of have that in your blood, but that's not usually where you start on day one, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. It's a process.
Esmond, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for such an engaging discussion. And my question was if you could talk about any books that you have, like just a set place in your bookshelf or you love sharing with your friends.
Awesome.
It could be
Susie.
fun, like maybe even fiction, right?
Yeah, it could be fun, yes. Or even art, like, so on the industry side, Susie, we're total geeks, so that just made my heartstrings sing as well. But yeah, I think, Susie, do you have a couple? I know you have a whole bookshelf over there.
I know.
What are
I'm
your
like,
top ones?
my brain. I'm like,
Yeah.
gosh, the books. I think
So American, I know so I also consult in the venture cap world as well as investment portfolios. And so I had a big gig with Optum and Optum Ventures up in Boston. And American Sickness is a very good one to kind of as a baseline. I know it's several years old, but I know that was one.
Yeah.
If you're kind of just trying to understand the history, I thought it was very well written as far as an overall. From a cultural perspective, I mean, some of the leadership ones are the 7 Habits of Effective People. There's another one called Radical Candor. That's a really good one. Radical Candor by a woman out of Google on the leadership side as well. And then I think the more you can follow local news and then medical magazines, I think that's key. Susie, I don't know. And we're always on LinkedIn, y'all. Like, we are following so many feeds. And if there's a company you want to get involved, follow them, figure out who the leaders are. Don't be shy, even potentially in smaller organizations. I think it really makes people feel excited when students reach out and say, hey, I know you're really busy, but could we meet for a 15-minute coffee at the local Starbucks, or can I show up and have a coffee? Susie and I love that. So anyway, go ahead, Suze.
It would be so hard for me to tell you like my favorite, and it's not even a healthcare thing. And Taryn knows one of my biggest things is if you ask me my favorite anything, my brain freezes. But that said, one of my absolute recent favorite authors and speakers is Simon Sinek. And I think the name of this book that I just love is Start With Why. Is that right? Is that the name of this?
Start With Why.
I mean, it's several years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's several years old, but I absolutely love the message of that book. And I would absolutely also concur with what Taryn's saying. When I started out and I had a music degree, of course, everything was in book form and magazine form back then, a million years ago, but now it's online. But I read modern healthcare. Truly every periodical there was, because I knew nothing. And so, and I just got really smart really fast, because every single magazine that was laying on every coffee table everywhere in the building, I read it. So I understood the language of the business of healthcare really quickly.
And I think something that came up, we had a networking session at the beginning of the week with a couple of people who are either with ACHE or there was some other
Yeah,
experts in it. But
absolutely. Great organizations.
well, that's kind of what they had suggested was what exactly what you're saying. Just get to know the language, read, be aware of what's going on in the news, current events. If you follow different organizations, either on Twitter or LinkedIn, you know what they're doing. So then you go to these events and you can interact where you're not just saying, hey, can you get me a job? But you're saying, oh, I read this thing. And do you find this interesting? Because I do. And then you're just in dialogue and you're developing relationships because you just can speak this language. So newsletters, any kind of online periodicals, that was the same thing that they were recommending to subscribe.
Yeah,
And Susie,
Becker's Healthcare Review are two things I want to tell you online that I would recommend: Becker's Healthcare Review and also the Kaiser Foundation. And, and somebody's asking about trends.
yeah, that's why I wanted to interrupt you. And it's always
so
painful to
Kaiser
interrupt
Foundation is absolutely superb in the following trends. So get on their list.
Yeah, for sure. And Susie, with 5 minutes left, and Quincy, if you're okay with this, I know trends are coming up a lot. Like everyone's asking, and we have a slide. So I'm gonna load up the slide on the trends that Susie and I are seeing. And let me just find this slide. Where are the trends? Here are the key trends. Susie, can you see my slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we put together this top 5. I mean, there's a lot going on, and obviously you gave the crew here, Susie, some really good stuff to follow. But from the trends that we see, I think about it in the operations sense as well as the industry sense, and then Susie also thinks vice versa, right? We're kind of like the inside out sock of each other. But for me, there's a lot of trends around big company versus small company culture. And what I mean by that is, I think many of you know, there's kind of this land of the great resignation, the great slowdown, if you will. And so many people, even within the healthcare space, are starting to really get smart about the organizations that they buy from, but also where they go for their care, right? They're really starting to get educated around what is this ecosystem of healthcare, the accessibility of healthcare, and where do I want to turn up and also have my money go to? So that's I could talk for an hour just about that, but that's a definite trend that we're seeing. And I'll take number 2, Susie, and then I'll have you do 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So number 2 is kind of goes hand in hand, but the war for talent. So there is a rapidly changing labor market. And in finance, there's a saying goes, when the economy goes down, smart people double up on their investment, right? There's those that panic and cash out of their investments, and then there's people who double down. Since all of you are either getting your master's, in your undergrad, etc., now is the time, if you have the desire to work really hard and get in there is a labor shortage. So I always say this is the time where you're going to double down. It reminds me of where I was in the housing crash, where I had to take a little bit of a pay cut to get my foot in the door somewhere, but I doubled down, worked really hard, and then 2 years later got promoted and skyrocketed in my career. So that's also something that we've been seeing in the last 2 years on the labor market within healthcare and the skills and abilities within healthcare.
Yeah, so 3, 4, and 5, I looked a little bit more in just inside of healthcare. What were some top trends? And obviously there's a bunch of them. But I wanted to pick on the technology, artificial intelligence, and automation because it was interesting, not surprising, of course, because this is going on outside of healthcare and in healthcare. But one of the things that this article pointed out is that it doesn't just affect what you would think, which is reading radiology reports and the use of computers in doing surgical procedures and so forth, but it also affects the humans doing the work because of the movement forward and all the technology and automation means the humans who are doing administrative work in healthcare, in other words, the non-clinical people, the you and me of the healthcare world, the expectations for speed and efficiency are going to be really ramping up as artificial intelligence and automation get better and better. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect of the story. Dramatic increases, as you might imagine, with COVID in the virtual delivery of primary care and other healthcare, but mostly we've seen it in the primary care area. So in March of 2020, less than 1% of all primary care physician visits with patients were delivered through telehealth or telemedicine. In April of 21, almost 50%. So from less than 1% in March of 2020, 13 months later, almost 50% were telemedicine, telehealth visits. So, I mean, it's just extraordinary. And I will tell you, in 2018 and 19, we had potential clients coming to us who were in telemedicine and telehealth. Medicare would not even reimburse for it. So that's the kind of just enormous tectonic shift we're seeing in telemedicine and telehealth. So if you're thinking career paths, you know, when you see those kind of big shifts, it screams opportunity. Dramatic increases, as you might imagine, with mental health services and support. Taryn can talk a lot about just the pressure on the system for providers and the pressure on the system for human resource people. So just across the board, all the stress of what's going on in the world, and I know we're right at 2:00 with, you know, COVID and just people coping, has really made enormous impacts on mental health.
Yeah.
And
Behavioral health, and also just, you know, the behavioral health on top of prescription drugs, on top of mental health and cultures, people being able to be their best selves at work. It all goes hand in hand in this large ecosystem, which we all have felt in something as unique as a global pandemic, for sure. That is a big old trend that I think is going to last and blow up over the next decade, for sure, in behavioral health. Woo!
This is so great. Okay, people, any other questions? I wish we could go longer.
I know. I hope you invite us back. I hope everybody found this really useful. I'm so glad to see it's such great questions. And obviously, you know, Quincy, we love UTD. We love all the students. I mean, it's just the best. So we love spending time with y'all.
Yeah.
Well,
healthcare is always going to be a good career choice. We will always need healthcare.
So you all said it's okay for students to reach out to you on LinkedIn and connect. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes. In fact, the one thing I want to do with a plug, I know a lot of people were asking, even the mock interviews, we have three folks starting on Monday, but every quarter we at least have one internship, if not post-grad. So even Susie and I were talking about, we may open up 2 more internship positions in the new year. So feel free to follow Cypress, link up with Susie and I, stay close. We're right down the street too. We're within 3 miles of the school campus, so that makes it a lot easier. And yeah, I hope everybody keeps in touch.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been
everybody. This was fun. Appreciate your time.
so fun. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Take care. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.